I have used a lot of improvisation within my work. I first became involved in spontaneous work when I was living in San Francisco in 1968, and I was lucky to be able to join a group that was run by Del Close, and the overall group was run by a person called Meyerson. But it was Del Close who had the most influence on me. And we worked from 10 in the morning till 7 at night, almost without a break. He was a hard taskmaster. And we would go on stage, and whatever came into our head, we would just create scenes and then develop these scenes as we went along. It was very exciting, and when doing it in front of an audience, it's quite dangerous. And because you never know where you're going to go and where you're going to end. So spontaneous improvisation really started with people like Moreno, who developed psychometrics and psychodrama, and in the garden in Vienna he used to encourage young children to spontaneously act out stories. And later on Viola Spolin, who wrote a book about it, and she began to express ideas, and later on it was very easy to begin to use spontaneous improvisation into therapy. And after working within the group, so there are certain keys, certain natural roles you take on, and one of the things that was very important, that there's no denial. So if someone says they're in a box, they're in a box, and then if someone joins them, they accept the premise that they're in a box. When I came back to England and finally settled in Bristol, I set up my own theatre company called Thin Air, which with Joe Clark we ran for 12 years, pouring in festivals, pubs, clubs, all over the place, and totally spontaneous improvisation. We would go into a place and never be quite sure ever what we were doing. But I did notice there were certain keys that would link in. The first of all, as I've already explained, there was no denial. Wherever you were, that is where that was the situation, and that was accepted. Then there were the multiple roles, that you could move from one role to another, and you could move from one character to another. You could play a nasty old man, or you could play a very young, delightful dancing girl. You change roles within the situation, so you could play multiple roles. And I noticed that adults and children both enjoyed improvisation. First of all, because they knew that the actors sometimes didn't know where they were going, and then sometimes you used to end up at a dead end, and you then would have to cut, and then you would have to start again. And some scenes would be very moving and very sad, so you'd bring a whole range of emotions and create a sense of realism. Other times it would be funny and or satirical, and the audience would laugh, and it's very interesting because as actors you weren't ever sure, because you weren't playing for laughs, what the audience found amusing. Sometimes we'd go off into fantasy and create all sorts of fantasy worlds, fantasy creatures, and all spontaneously. And the art of improvisation is not to think. It's not to think about being clever, and not to think about what you're going to do, like have a storyline in your head. The idea, it works best when you have no preconceptions about what's going on. I remember one of the company, he sat on the edge of the stage. He just sat there looking at the audience, and everybody expected something would happen, and the other actors wouldn't come in until they were sure where it was going, and so they held back. But he held on, and the minutes passed, And went on and on and on, and the tension became unbearable. The audience felt the tension. They weren't irritable, they just felt there was this tremendous tension. And after quite some time, he suddenly said, "You don't like me, do you? Because I'm Jewish." And like, God, that just came out of nowhere. And then the other actors followed this up, and scenes began. So when you're doing spontaneous work, that's very important. The other thing is that things can come out about yourself. It's a way of learning about different issues. So sometimes we would bring issues out on stage, and that's about our own personal lives. And so we could then portray it and see how that worked. Later on, when I was to work in psychodrama, so a lot of the spontaneous work that I had done helped me, that when I became an auxiliary ego to someone, a protagonist in a group work, then I was able to link in and understand and follow it quite easily and make valuable contributions. Sometimes in improvisation it can go dreadfully wrong. I remember one day we were in a pub, and Joe came in through one door to the bar, and I came through the other in this pub, and I just suddenly said, "You know, who are you looking at?" And she said, "You tart." And suddenly the whole of the pub thought there was going to be a massive confrontation, and the atmosphere changed dramatically because the landlord hadn't told his client that there was going to be a show. And I remember one particular evening in a pub. It was packed. It was around about 10:30 at night. The pub was heaving and people were drunk. And we reenacted this scene. It's absolutely spontaneous. Where it came from, I don't know. But the idea was I was this lager lout, and I was chatting up Joe's bird, and I was drinking them down, supping them down. With all the lads, and they were right on top of us. I mean, we were working. There were 100 people around us, and we were packed tight in. And then she said, "You want to come home?" And I went, "Yeah." So, I'll come home, yeah, absolutely. Right. So she said, "Let's do it." So took off our clothes quickly, and she laid in the chair, and I just stepped on one side, stepped over, and went the other. And she said, "Well?" I said, "Well, what?" And she said, "Are you going to start?" I said, "Finished." And the absolute pub just collapsed. So there were all these young guys, boozers and what have you, real doing type, absolutely collapsed on this. I mean, it could have been a different, another reaction, but they just loved it. And then the dialogue that followed, we were questioning. And so sometimes, and it hits a mood, and you can't be sure what is going to happen. And it's dangerous and exciting to do spontaneous improvisation. I use improvisation with actors, of course, to release ideas and characterizations to allow them to experiment. And encounter groups, when we begin and they don't know each other so well, I use improvisation, spontaneous improvisation, to gain inspiration. Or sometimes when they reach an impasse and they want to move on, I suddenly say, right, let's forget about all that, let's do something. And usually out of this comes a resolution for the problem that they've been working on. So it's an exciting world, a dangerous world, but it has so much mileage. And today I feel a lot of improvisation, because I watch it quite carefully, is quite planned, and it's not that spontaneity. The real interest is when it just happens from nowhere. and no one is sure of what is going to happen, and that's when it becomes exciting and also at times quite terrifying.